Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Viking Codecast. This is a regular series of discussions with established developers and other folks from the tech community, designed to help you as a prospective developer, current developer, anyone out there who wants to see a little bit more about life behind the curtain in the development field, in the technology field, so that we can get some interaction with folks who have achieved their path to the other side and have been doing this for a while and have some good wisdom to impart on us and can teach us some cool stuff. So just if you're not familiar, the Viking Code School is an online web development school. We run an immersive program and a flex program, so there's a little bit something for everyone. And our goal, our students are all here. You can see them in the Hangout. And to everyone who's here, thank you for joining us. To everyone who's listening, this is thank you for joining us as well. This is designed to be an interactive chat, so we'll have plenty of opportunity for asking questions and getting your feedback and your thoughts. But first, I'd like to just quickly introduce our guest, Winston. Winston, and am I pronouncing it right? Teo?
Yeah, Teo. It's correct.
Teo. Cool. Thank you for joining us all the way from Singapore. Winston's the founder of Jolly Good Code, which is a software consultancy in Singapore. He's been doing agile and test-driven development previously with Pivotal, I believe, right?
Yes,
and,
that's right.
Yeah, and among other things, and have been a startup founder and an engineer. And so I know that we have a lot of cool stuff that we could dive into, and in particular. Specifically your experience around startups and for new developers looking to get into startups or to joining startups, I think is a really cool avenue that we can explore. But first of all, I just want to say again, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. Well, just to kick things off, it's usually good to get a good understanding of how exactly did you get to where you are, and so maybe if you wouldn't mind, what got you into this field, and what's your path been to where you are right now?
Right. So sort of background about myself. I graduated from university about 10 years ago. At that time in Singapore, the startup industry was pretty much non-existent, and so any of the companies that came to universities to do recruitment are one of those big companies like IBM, Accenture, HP, and stuff like that. So a lot of us I was from the computer science stream. A lot of us who wanted to get a job after university sort of naturally went towards the direction of these big companies. So I wasn't an exception. I actually joined IBM straight after I graduated, and I became a database administrator. I was outsourced to Singapore Airlines actually, and I sort of managed 200, 300 over databases, Oracle, MySQL, and other kind of databases. So what I do during those times is basically just installing, uninstalling databases, running SQL scripts for the applications team, and resetting database passwords every 3 months, because that's sort of the standard protocol for security measures. After about 1.5 years, I sort of got bored because this wasn't really what I had in mind. I sort of really liked programming when I was in school, so I felt that I really should go back, to do more programming. And I really wanted to join a startup because I think that that's where you get to learn a lot more things rather than just being, a small screw in a big company where you only do very, very specific tasks. I wanted to have a breadth of learning. So I decided to look around for startups at that time in Singapore which I could join. One of the startups I joined is called Wigo.com, and they are sort of a travel search for flights and hotels. Think of it like kayak.com. So when I joined, I actually got the opportunity to then learn Ruby. So that's when I started to pick up Ruby and Ruby on Rails. I was given the task to build a standalone analytics application for the entire company. So you might be asking, oh, why don't you use Google Analytics at that time? That was about 7-8 years ago, and at that time actually Google Analytics wasn't good enough for our use. So which is why we had to, rebuild something from scratch. So I spent about two and a half years to about 3 years building that out, and growing myself in the company, and I eventually became like sort of like a product manager. At that time, Pivotal Labs came to Singapore and decided to set up a branch, sort of like a center of excellence in Singapore. And I was sort of like headhunted to join them as one of the first engineers. It was really a bit of, a lot of thinking on my side whether I wanted to go to join Pivotal, because I was already like a product manager. Like I mentioned, earlier when I was talking about, the dreams of all graduates from university, the aim was to become a project manager, maybe go up the career ladder and just became like an administrator of sorts in a big company. So I really wasn't sure whether I wanted to become a developer again. It felt like a step back. But I started to look up, what Pivotal is all about, what kind of engineering practices they do. So I was very intrigued because they do pair programming, they do test-driven development, they do all these things called agile, extreme programming. And I was like, oh, wow, should I really join them and sort of like learn these new things, become an engineer again? After reading a lot of stuff online, I decided that, okay, why not? Let's give it a try. So I joined Pivotal Labs Singapore, and it was really the best choice in my career so far, I felt, because I got to learn so much more about good engineering practices. How to do pair programming right, how to do test-driven development right, how to approach projects with an agile mindset. And I really learned so much in that 3 years that I felt I was pretty lucky to be able to learn all these things without having to step into San Francisco at all. And so I decided to start my own consultancy after that. That was like about 2.5 years ago, because I felt that I really wanted to reach out to other startups of smaller scale, and to be able to work with them and help train them in all of these agile practices that I know of. Which is why I started Jolly Good Code, and I started doing more things beside the regular engineering and programming stuff. So as part of Jolly Good Code, we sort of like do a number of things. Firstly, we help startups build minimal viable products. So that's like engineering work for me. We also do like pure agile consultation, where we only go into teams with already established tech processes, and where they are looking, to transform and change the team so that they can do more of the agile stuff. I also do pure classroom training. So Ruby on Rails, I've conducted like public courses, like for like 2 weeks just to teach Ruby on Rails, and I've done like corporate lessons as well for companies who were on Java but they wanted to change their developers to become Ruby developers. And then we also build our own internal products, and of course on the side, I do a lot more community projects. Like I run the Ruby meetups in Singapore, and I also organize the RedDotRubyConf in Singapore for the last 4 years. So the RedDotRubyConf just ended last week actually, or the week before, and a lot of videos are already online. You might have seen people tweeting about it. There are a few talks that are pretty good, and I think it has gotten quite a number of retweets on those talks. So that's basically sort of my history so far, and that's where I am now. So as part of Pivotal, as part of Jolly Code Code, I've worked with a lot of startups. I've worked with a lot of corporates as well. And I've seen a lot of developers. I've seen a lot of project managers. So a lot of experience came from all these kind of daily interaction with them. And probably today, I could share more about how you could become a better programmer for being a startup, and moving forward after you have graduated from Viking Code School.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think what I'd like to focus on, just to kick us off, is two of the transitions that you had. One of them was basically around Pivotal. One of them was basically it sounded like you moved from the larger, more established, more enterprisey world towards a much and also via a bit of product side as well. But what were the big shocks that you got, or the major changes that you saw moving from the much larger code bases to moving over to a place like Pivotal, where things are much more rapid, and the clients are generally on the smaller side, or the projects seem to be on the smaller side than what you were working on before?
So when I was with WeGo, actually it's still pretty much a startup. The code bases, I would say it's more of legacy code bases rather than large code bases, because there are a few developers who are working on the product already. So I guess the biggest shock is that you could actually do sustainable and maintainable engineering. What do I mean by that, right? So before Pivotal and after Pivotal, right? Like during the consulting and stuff like that, I've seen a lot of companies who don't employ sustainable engineering. People have a lot of death marches. They work long hours. So that's one. And the second thing is maintainable code. So a lot of people don't write tests. In fact, I myself am guilty of that while I was with the company before Pivotal. I mean, the code works, but there are no automated tests. So I test them manually myself. And what happened is that, after I joined Pivotal, it sort of introduced me to the concept of test-driven development. Okay, so, not everyone has to do test-driven development, but at least it also introduced me to the concept of test. That test is important, and test is the thing that, helps you make your code maintainable. And it allows you to take holidays, without feeling guilt as well, because anyone who looks at the code will probably have a better idea of what you were trying to do versus trying to guess what you were trying to do. And people, would have no inhibitions about updating your code if they need to. So I think that's sort of really one of the main things I learned, between coding on a very rockstar style versus coding in a very process-driven, good practices style. And I think so right now, whenever I talk to engineers, that is one of the things I emphasize too, because I found that in university, or rather in any of the and I think code schools like generally do teach this now, but if you come out from the traditional universities, I don't think they emphasize that much on testing. It's more about, okay, let's get this thing out working, it works, and then I'll give you a grade for it. But when you step out into the real world, it's not so much about making the code work. I think that is one of the primary responsibilities of an engineer. The code should work, but at the same time, another discipline that developers should pick up is also to learn about testing. And you don't ship if you don't test your code, because if you do, right, you're just going to cause more problems down the road. And even though testing does take more time, but it is time well spent. In fact, in the long run, it will definitely give you a lot more benefits over the time that you have spent, writing the test in the first place.
And so when you actually, so you went through the experience, actually it's probably a good idea to maybe give us a window into what it's like to work at a place like Pivotal, which emphasizes all of these things that you're talking about, and then maybe we can focus on what happened afterwards.
Right.
So what's it like?
Oh, it was intense. So before I joined, right, I heard about this thing called pair programming. So I wasn't sure whether it is, for me. If some of you might have tried pair programming, some of you might not have tried it before, but essentially what pair programming means is that two of you will sit down together side by side and work on the same piece of code together. So you might be staring at the same screen, or you might have dual screens, but they're all mirrored. You would have your own personal keyboard, you will have your own personal mouse. But for 8 hours a day, you would be doing coding with your partner, with your buddy. And that's what we do, or that's what Pivotal used to do. I hope they still do that, because I'm not sure what their process are right now. But that was what I was doing every day for those 3 years that I was with Pivotal Labs. And so if we got a project, we will start breaking it down into stories, put it into Pivotal Tracker, and we will have daily stand-ups. We would work off the stories in Pivotal Tracker. We would code with our partner, do it in the test-driven development manner. We ship it out, get acceptance, get clients to look at it, do retrospectives, every 2 weeks, or depending on what the schedule is like, and sort of like keep getting feedback from the clients and your code about how to improve, and that's really how we work at Pivotal.
And so after doing that for you said I think 3 years, what made you transition out of that? Why did you decide to start your own thing?
Right. So as a big consultancy, there are some restrictions in what they can do, what they cannot do. So like I mentioned, I was there for about 2.5 to 3 years, and I felt that I wanted to be able to reach out to more smaller scale startups and to be able to advise them on what could be possible in terms of planning for their technology, planning for the architecture, and most importantly, how they could have good culture, good engineering culture that could make their engineering work sustainable and maintainable from then onwards. So being part of a bigger consultancy doesn't allow me to reach out to them as easily as I could. At the same time, I was really passionate about training as well. Like doing pure classroom trainings for Ruby on Rails, because a lot of people came to me, they're like, hey, I want to learn, where can I learn? The only thing I could point them to were online resources at that time. And I felt that, hey, I really like teaching as well. So that is something that I would like to do, which I can't possibly do as part of a bigger consultancy too. And also the other reason is mainly I want to do more community work, in the sense of running the meetups, running the conferences, and honestly, running a conference is a full-time job. It takes a lot of effort and a lot of work, right? So when I was with another company and running the conference, I didn't felt good about it, because sometimes you have to take time off to actually make sure things are going well for the conference, etc. So I thought moving out into a role that I had autonomy and purpose for myself allowed me to actually do some of these things much more easily, and so which is why I decided to move out. Yeah, so that I could actually do it and have the autonomy to decide.
Awesome. Well, so before we move in and talk about kind of what I'd like to talk about next, maybe is the engineering practices side of working with startups and specifically the kinds of projects that you're taking on and things like that. Before we do that, I wanted to put out the call for questions, and so you're welcome to ask questions anywhere you want. For those of you who are currently here, you can just unmute yourself and speak up. For those of you who are outside, we have the Q&A app, which is something that is you should be able to find it on your little toolbar in the Hangout. So we have that open as well, and you can ask questions there.
Hi, Winston. I have a question.
Yep.
So, what was your light bulb moment where you felt confident that the test you were writing had adequate coverage?
Okay. So at the very beginning, it was more of talking to my partner who was pairing with me to be like, hey, is this okay? Is this good enough for us? If another guy sort of like voiced his opinions that okay, this is good enough, we sort of like moved on. When I started to code, by myself on my own, I guess the benchmark is always when it's sort of like if I throw away my code and I only have my test left, am I still able to rebuild my system based on the test that I have? So whenever I look at my test, then like I said, right, why do we write tests? There are a lot of reasons if you search online. So to me, writing tests is about accountability, about testing your code, making sure it's correct. It's about maintainability. At the same time, to me, it also acts as live documentation. When you do agile and stuff like that, there's something that you'll find a lot of people say, oh, we don't really do any documentation. So that's not true, right? We still do documentation. And in this case, right, testing to me feels like live documentation. It's documentation that never goes out of date. Because as soon as you make changes to your code, you need to make changes to your test. Whereas, if you write like physical documentation or documentation in Microsoft Word, when you change your code, you will probably forget to update it, and then your documentation will be out of date. So it will be outdated as soon as you write it. So test to me is something that is live and is always something that you have to maintain and make sure is relevant and correct to your code. So if you can throw away your code, so I've heard of this story before, right? Where if let's say there's a fire and you only can take away your code or your test, which one should you take, right? So to me, maybe I should take out my test, because with my test, I can still rebuild my code. But if I take out my code only, maybe I cannot actually make changes to my code anymore without the test, right? So that is something that you can think about. Like if you only are left with your code, with your test, are you able to rebuild your code or your project with that alone? So maybe if you think of it in that sense, you would sometimes be able to sort of like glean the sense that, okay, I think this test is good enough, I've adequate coverage, and then you can move on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's actually incredibly insightful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions from in here or without? Cool. So Winston, like I said, I'm curious to hear then, coming from your experience working with Pivotal, you said that you wanted to move in and then work with some smaller startups and take more of a full life cycle and broader approach to their engineering problems. So how is that transition? Like, what is so much different about working with startups and specifically how their engineering decisions are made and how their architecture tends to come together that you found out about?
Right. So working with smaller startups definitely have a lot more constraints, right? Firstly, resources constraint. So firstly, they might not have engineers. Secondly, they might not have very solid tech engineers as well to actually help develop the product in general. So and of course, a lot of these smaller startups, they don't understand about Agile in the first place. So what I had to do a lot of times is firstly to help them understand what Agile really means, how we could use it to actually help them develop a minimal viable product. So some clients, will come to me to be like, hey, I want to build this, and then they tell me they have this big documents that they have written, across the span of 6 months to a year, and they just want to develop that app. Right. To me, that's not agile at all. Then I would tell them, hey, this is not the way you would develop the app, because as soon as you have started writing that fake documentation, right, the thing is outdated as well, right? You do not know what you really need, and unless you have really built it before, and the market is ever changing, the environment is ever changing. So why are you so sure that we should build according to this set of specifications that you have written, right? So the first step is to educate them that we need to be flexible and adaptable, and sort of like play along to our environments as it changes. And we don't try and plan for everything from the very beginning, but we always do a lot of replanning in the process leading up to the final development of the minimal viable product. So that's the first hurdle, to get the management to buy into the idea. The second hurdle then, of course, is to talk to their engineers, if they have, on how they could develop the app in a maintainable and responsible manner. So it's about introducing them to the concepts of test-driven development, or at least testing in general. And of course, with regards to that, then you would bring in concepts like continuous integration, continuous deployment. So depending on the projects, right? I don't necessarily always introduce pair programming, because honestly, pair programming requires you to hire for it. not everyone is a suitable pair programmer. Pair programmer requires you to have certain skill sets. For example, the ability to communicate well, the ability to communicate your ideas properly, and obviously to be a likable person so that people wouldn't mind sitting beside you for 8 hours a day, right? So not everyone can be a pair programmer, and of course, if I go into a company which already has programmers, I won't try and change it overnight to be like, hey, tomorrow all of you will start doing pair programming, because they wouldn't hire to do pair programming in the first place, and not all of them would like it. But at the same time, then we understand what pair programming gives us and try and supplement it with other kinds of practices. So the one kind of practices that I do a lot nowadays is actually code review, intensive and extensive code review. So introducing the concepts of, all right, let's work on a feature, let's push it up to a branch, let's push it up to GitHub as a pull request, and then let's get our peers to actually do code review on them before we actually merge the code in. So I think that fundamentally it's important to make sure that everyone has an idea of how the code base is evolving, and to just sort of like double check on each other's work to make sure there's no gross typo errors or logic errors that will result in the app failing itself. And of course, testing, right? So we teach them how to do testing properly, and how to make sure that the app is developed in a sustainable manner and maintainable manner. So these are some of the stuff that we speak to startups a lot of times and talk to them about, especially in Singapore. A lot of startups are founded, either by business people or by young, fresh graduates from universities. So either of them, lack the sort of like engineering expertise or experience to be able to formulate all of these properly that will allow them to have a longer runway in terms of sustainable engineering. So that's what the challenge is all about when running Jolly Good Code and talking to small, medium enterprises and startups.
So does it? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. No, please go ahead.
I was going to ask for a question.
Yeah.
And so if anyone's here and wants to unmute, feel free, or you can chat away. So I see in the group chat here, we have a question. It is, do you recommend that MVPs are validated before they're built? For example, by testing wireframes or testing the appetite for downloading the app via a test landing page?
Definitely. So I think fundamentally when we want to build an MVP, the ultimate question that we need to ask is, what is the problem? What is the problem that you're trying to solve? And at the same time, then what is your hypothesis of solving the problem? I've seen clients who come to me who just want to build an app where if you ask them about the problem, they don't really have a problem statement, but they just want to build that app. And so it is for this kind of projects that we feel would have the higher rate of failures, because it doesn't exist for a need by itself. It just exists because I don't know, for whatever reasons, right? So I think ultimately when you want to build something, you need to make sure that the problem statement is sound and you have a few hypotheses on how to solve it, and then test the hypotheses first. For example, it could be like what you said, wireframes or building a landing page. But I feel that at the same time, if you can go out and actually talk to customers, potential customers, get their feedback on what you're trying to do, I think that would be even more valuable, because that's when people will tell you their actual pain points and what you're trying to build, if it would solve their actual pain points or not. So only when you have really, really validated your idea, then you go into building. Engineering is always an expensive task, whether you're doing it yourself or you are getting someone else to do it, right? It is not cheap at all. So you don't want to waste engineering hours trying to figure out what is right or what's wrong. When you go into engineering mode, you want to make sure that you are at least, right, 50 to 80% sure that this is sort of the thing you're trying to build because it would solve that problem that you had earlier. So I think that is really, really important, which is why you would probably find a lot of lean principles coming in, where people teach about how to do design thinking, how to actually go out to customers, get feedback, etc. So I think these are necessary skills and principles that you should know about too before you embark on actually building the application itself. Does that answer, Nadia? Hope it does.
Yeah. Cool. And so what about from the perspective of developers on the team? So if I'm specifically perhaps a junior developer, someone who's I guess we could start with someone who wants to step into one of these roles in a smaller company at a company that's operating on probably more of a hair on fire type of theory of management.
Right.
What do you recommend in terms of, or what should they watch out for in terms of making that jump from recently educated to butt in seat and working for one of these companies?
Right. I think let's talk about on a personal level first, right? So on a personal level, I think as engineers, we must always be hungry to learn everything that we can, be it on the job or be it through online resources. So, for example, maybe to bring up another story that I had, right? How I transited from being a database administrator in IBM to becoming an engineer in a startup world. So the story goes like this, right? When I started to look for jobs at that time in the programming role, actually there were like small digital agencies in Singapore, that were doing PHP, that were sort of like hiring for junior programmers as well. I actually went and interviewed with some of them, and I was actually rejected by a number of them because they were like, oh, you're in a big company, right? You don't learn any valuable skills at all, actually. I know what you guys do over there. You are only like locked into a silo function, and that's what you do. So I don't think I can, hire you, etc. So that really got me thinking, and I decided to, okay, since my job isn't going to give me, what I can learn to progress onto the next career goal that I have to do it on my own. So I started to do more side projects on my own. At that time, I'm not sure if you guys still know about it, but there's this thing called Grease Monkey Scripts, right? So it's actually a plugin that you can put into Firefox and then run like JavaScript kind of code, and it would like modify UX of certain web pages or things like that. So at that time, I started to do a little bit more of these Grease Monkey scripts. I actually built a few. Like one of it was so again a little bit history. At that time, there was this thing called Google Reader. It was a RSS reader by Google. It has now been killed by Google already. But I sort of like did a Grease Monkey script that meshed up Google Reader and your Gmail account. So you could actually have one interface with your Gmail inbox and Google Reader at the bottom. And I also did a bunch of other Grease Monkey scripts, and some of it were actually featured on lifehacker.com. And so it was through these side projects then I felt more confident of myself because I've been learning. I know a little bit more about what programming is about, and then I decided to go look for jobs in other startups, and they saw potential in these side projects that I was working on, and that's why they hired me. So I think on a personal level, right, it's important to maintain that hunger to learn. Then at the same time, I think as junior developers, we also need to have like humility, the humility to learn from other people as well. And to be able to accept opinions from other more senior developers. So even if you're stepping into these fresh startups, you might have come out from the code school with a set of principles that the code school has given you, a set of practices. But at the same time, when working in reality, startups might work in a different way. They might have different opinions, different culture of how they want to get things done. So it'll be good to have a side of humility and learn from whatever they are doing. I don't mean to say they might be right, they could be wrong, but it's more of, to learn what they're doing and to tell yourself whether it's right or wrong and make an opinion for yourself after that. I also think that it's important for engineers to actually learn the skills of communication. I've seen a lot of engineers who can't communicate well, and even though they could write, excellent code, but they can't really articulate what the code is about, and so it doesn't really help in sort of like making their point across in why code should be done in a certain way. At the same time, I think it's also good to embrace this principle of simplicity. So whenever I'm tasked with doing some engineering work, I'll always ask myself, and this probably comes from the fact of me having done test-driven development for 3 years, right, and more now already. I think now it's about 6 years, right? So when you start doing test-driven development, you will find that you'll be asking yourself this question a lot of times, and this question is, what is the simplest thing that you can do next, right? To get this out of the door. Because when you do test-driven development, you'll be writing your test first, and then you'll be thinking, what is the simplest thing you can do to get the test to pass, right? And the cycle goes on. So whether you're doing TDD or not, I think that's basically a question that engineers should always ask, and not try to over-engineer from the very beginning. Because when you work with actual product owners, and if the product owners are not techie people themselves, right, you will find that they always have a set of ideas that doesn't really match up to what you have in mind as well. So the idea is always build something in the simplest possible sense and get feedback as soon as you can. Before you actually try and over-engineer this thing, you spend 5 days or even 2 weeks working on it, show it to the product owner before the product owner comes back and tell you, oh, actually, this is not what I had in mind. I only wanted, the code, either the text to be red in color, right? And then you have built this monster over 2 weeks. So I think that's something that developers, even junior developers, should learn, right? Of simplicity and getting feedback as soon as you can. At the same time, then pragmatism. What does it take, to get things out of the door, versus trying to again, like I said, I guess this ties in with simplicity as well, right? Versus trying to over-engineer the problem and trying to build a monster solution out of it. Yeah, last but not least, of course, is to get things done. I think it's very important for developers to just get things done and get things shipped. And this really helps to prove, right, your capability and your ability. I've seen engineers who prefer to be in the more research mode, so they have always been trying to research and go for a more elegant solution, but it doesn't really help them or even the company in the long run, because they are always taking a little bit more, and because the solution that they generate, right, might not be the best as well. Like I said, if there's no frequent communication with the product owner. So these are sort of the advice I would give to any engineers who start to come into the startup world and join any teams that they will be joining in the future. I think these are a few important points that I think engineers should learn about.
So just to piggyback right away on that, how can they show that? So if I have all of these things, or at least many of those things, like how do I convince a prospective startup employer that I can actually do these things, or that I possess these qualities? Do you have any tips for kind of getting on their radar with regards to that and standing out?
So all of these things, yeah, might be a little bit for you to showcase before you actually get into the startup. I think during the interviews, it will be important for you to show, your eagerness to learn and, your humility in learning from them. I think if you have side projects, it would be even good to showcase, that your project is simple, you're not trying to over-engineer a difficult problem, or even if you're able to walk through right? How you generate the problem to the interviews, to your future employers, and showcase that, you know, your thought process is actually is actually simple and pragmatic, and you're just trying to get things done. You understand the trade-offs that you're making. You understand that, you know, there's always a balance between these two, and that you have in mind, you know, future features that could be built, but at the same time you're just building the simplest set possible first, and you know how you can actually sort of like transit over to build the future features later, without sacrificing, you know, the simplicity that you have right now. I think these are things that you could probably communicate during your interview, so that, you know, people would understand about your thought process. Yeah. So
I think we're getting towards the end here. Are there? I'd like to open things up again to questions, though. Obviously, we've kind of covered a lot of ground, from big companies to consultancies to test-driven development to getting your foot in the door to all sorts of different things. So I imagine there must be questions. Does anyone have anything that you wanted to pick up on? Again, if you're viewing, feel free to use the Q&A app, or if you're here, feel free to just unmute and fire away.
Yeah, you can ask me anything about programming, about agile, about test-driven development, code review, etc.
Yeah, I have one question.
Yep.
So if you have trying to put out a product that has a supplier side and also has do you create two different MVPs, or try to create one MVP that will service both?
Right. So if I got your question correctly, you're asking if, let's say, you have a product that has a client side and like a admin side, is that right?
Yeah, like a supplier side or admin.
Right. So typically in such an MVP, I think the most common sort of like analogy I've come across is marketplace, because marketplace you have to deal with, right, the buyers and the sellers. I guess it sort of like ties into your question. So do you build two products or one product? I would try and build one product first, right? Keep it simple, like I mentioned, because if you start to build two products, again, then you would need to split resources between the two products, and then you have to deploy them separately as well. You can't do any code sharing. So the thing is, would there even be code sharing in the first place? You don't know. I don't know as well. Which is why don't we just keep it in the same place? Because if there is, then it's much easier to do that. So you see, we try not to over-engineer the problem in the very beginning. What could happen is that maybe the buyer side, the seller side only requires a login right now and a simple, you know, page to actually put in the form, and that's it. So if it's only that, right, feature for a beginning, why do you want to spin it out into two separate apps? But unless, of course, you know, you already have like a big set of feature sets that you know you want to build, and you know there's a security concern between these two set of users. You really need to segregate them on the application level, on the database level, on the firewall level, etc., etc. Then yeah, you might want to split them out into two apps. But otherwise, you know, if it's a relatively simple app, even if there are two roles or even multiple roles that are going to access the system, I would tend to try and start it in just one single app first.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think Vishal, did you have a question?
Yeah. Hi, Winston.
Hi.
Yeah, it's been awesome just listening to you. So yeah, really thank you. I've been learning a lot. By the way, I have been to Singapore once, and it's a beautiful, beautiful country. I really love the people and the culture there. So
thank
awesome.
you.
Yeah, I'm originally from India. So,
okay.
But I live in the U.S. now.
Right.
My question is, like, in terms of, like, you know, constant learning, right? So what kind of resources should let's make it with respect to Ruby and Rails. So what kind of resources, what kind of avenues should one look at? Like, I believe, like, you know, maybe going to conferences or, you know, that sort of thing helps. I mean, you know, and if it does, like, in what way?
Right. So what kind of resources? I think if we talk about offline, yes, so meetups definitely would help, right? Get to go to meetups, meet people. I hope meetups, have good talks that would allow you to be exposed to new ideas as well. Go to conferences, because that's where you get to see the actual people who are writing gems that you use probably every day. You might even get to meet, Matt, the creator of Ruby himself. You probably meet DHH, the creator of Rails, right? So it's good to meet them, be inspired by them, and of course to network with other fellow developers and find out what they are working on. That, oh wow, in fact Ruby itself can be used for so many different kinds of application, right? So those are the offline, I think, events that you can go on to. If you talk about online resources, right, I think, for example, there's this newsletter that I always subscribe to, rubyweekly.com. I think it helps to curate, a set of pretty interesting Ruby articles that you can follow. Sometimes I look at Reddit, slash Ruby. Some of the discussions there are pretty good as well. I guess there used to be Railscast, but it's no longer actively maintained, but it still has a couple of gems in there that are pretty nice and awesome. So it'd be good to use it sometimes. I know GoRails.com is trying to, it's sort of like of a similar nature as well, so you can definitely check it out. Otherwise, yeah, I also run my own newsletter. It's called rubyasia.com. Actually, I try and feature developers from Asia and Southeast Asia who have written articles, about Ruby as well. So I would just say, keep looking out for these newsletters, and don't restrict yourself to Ruby as well. I mean, when you're doing Ruby, I believe you'll be doing a lot of Rails as well. So when you're doing Rails, right, it's really like sort of like full stack development. You have to know a little bit of HTML, CSS, JavaScript as well. So do watch out for these newsletters too and subscribe to them so that you can learn. Sometimes it might not be newsletters, it might just be people writing blogs, right? So go subscribe to these blogs as well. I think that's really my recommendation.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Great. So I think that takes us to our finale here, and basically what I'd like to leave out with is Winston. Obviously, we have a diverse crew of people who are listening to this, but in general, we get a lot of folks, obviously, educating potential developers who are in this position, looking to get into this. If you're looking back at yourself, or maybe putting yourself in their shoes, just what's your parting advice in terms of getting themselves through that door and having a great career in development?
Right. So what I would say is programming is hard, right? But I assume that all of you who are here, watching this or reading the transcript of this, would have some passion in programming. So it's important to keep that fire burning within yourself, and to continue, improving yourself. Reading, watching, learning from your peers, learning from mentors if you can find them, to continue, like I mentioned, your hunger to learn new things. And you don't have to restrict yourself to Ruby as well, right? So go learn other programming languages, see what's the good in them, what's not so good in them, and develop your own opinions about what makes good engineering, what is a good practice and process that you yourself would like to be in, or like your team to eventually be evolve into. I think like, for example, me myself, I still love Ruby, right? I do Ruby every day, but I still look at other programming languages because I want to see what they are doing there that could be applicable to what we are doing here. So it's always good to keep learning. At the same time, keep the humility in yourself, right? And be simple, be pragmatic, communicate well in your team. I think ultimately, what I always share is that you need to care about a lot of things. You need to care about your users. You need to care about your products. But you should also care about your team, and you should also care about your code. When I talk about your team, it means, you know, helping your team succeed by being a better engineer. You know, contributing to all of the practices and processes that you have within the team, and helping to make sure that you know, these practices and processes are upheld too. You care about your code, you write tests, right? And you help people understand your code easily, so that it becomes maintainable. So I always espouse this principle where try not to own your code, right? In the sense of let other people have a chance to read your code, understand them, and make changes to it as well. In this way, then you would improve and be a better engineer, because you would read about what other people are trying to do as well, what people are trying to change, and, you know, ultimately, I think if you practice all of this, it would lead you to become a better engineer in general.
All right, thank you so much. If anyone here who's listening wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do so? Just to say thank you, or maybe.
You can, yeah, you can drop me an email. It's winston@jollygoodcode.com, or you can, you know, ping me on Twitter. It's at WinstonYW.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us, everyone who's listening. Thank you guys as well. Winston, much appreciated, and I hope you all join us next time. Have a great night.
Sure. Thank you. See you guys.
Thank you. Thank you.